My very special guest is the founder of Happier at Work, with the mission to solve the problem that 85% of employees are disengaged at work. She uses her research-based framework to partner with leaders to focus on workplace culture, cultivating balance, and empowering leaders. Her work supports employees to thrive and reach their full potential while helping organizations increase their bottom line. She's Aoife O'Brien. Welcome to the show, Aoife.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm a big fan of the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited as well because we had a brief conversation a little bit ago. We were introduced by Kelly Mackin, another guest on the show from an earlier time. Love Kelly and love the conversation that we had. So I couldn't wait to welcome you on the show.
Thank you. Likewise, I absolutely loved the conversation that we had before, and I'm so excited for this conversation.
Well, one of the reasons I was excited about that is I learned that you, like me, you're a world traveler. Your life and your personal journey has taken you, I would say, halfway across the globe and back. And my first question to get us started, Aoife, is what types of lessons or experiences, discoveries did you have going throughout your world travels?
I think there were so many. So I'll start with the personal. Like, I suppose for me, first of all, communication. I was traveling in places that I didn't speak the language. So you kind of have to learn how to communicate with people without using words, through actions and using your facial expressions and things like that. So I think that was the first area. I was robbed while I was traveling as well. And I suppose from that perspective, it really taught me about being resilient. I was away from home. I was alone. Again, I had to try and communicate what happened, but not in my native language. So that really taught me about picking myself back up again. And then I suppose there was the appreciation for the everyday things. So for me, I was using a travel towel. If anyone's ever used a travel towel, they're small, they're light, they're kind of a bit flimsy. So I really took pleasure when I stopped traveling and I was able to use a big full-size bath towel and I was able to hang up my clothes in the evening, like just an appreciation for those small things. So that's on the personal side. On the professional or more on the business side, this is the catalyst for me setting up in business. I always came from organizations that had an amazing workplace culture, and traveling to different countries or working in different organizations in different countries taught me that I had been lucky up to that point, and I landed in some not so favorable cultures, toxic, you might say, and just learning that I had been so lucky up to that point that there is such a thing as a really fantastic organization and a happy workplace. And then there's also the opposite. There's also the toxic organizations as well. For me, one of the things that bothered me a lot about the experience I had was a lack of transparency. And later, this is with 2020 vision, when I look back at that time, it's something I really value in other people is this idea of transparency. So the importance of values, I suppose you could say, looking back with that 2020 vision. And then I suppose the different aspects of work. So it's not just the people you work with, it's not just the work that you do, it's the leadership, it's the overall feeling that you get when you go to work. And I think I took for granted that I had all of those boxes ticked in organizations I had worked in previously. And in this particular organization where I learned all of these lessons, I loved the people that I worked with. I loved the job that I did. But it was really the leadership and the lack of transparency that bothered me a lot. So I suppose it's making sure that all of those pieces, all of those boxes are ticked.
It's amazing I've never made that connection before, but when you think about traveling and you go to these different countries, sometimes it's the culture, just generally speaking, sometimes it's the people. I remember on a trip to France one time, as an American, I had heard some horror stories, but I was delightfully surprised that in the south of France, we had just a lovely time, my family and me, but then went to one of the larger cities in the Bordeaux region and were treated very badly, which was just, some people having a bad day or whatever it might be. But it was so funny that you could have such different experiences even within the same country. Now, you have to remind me, Aoife, you started off in Dublin, but where did your travels, kind of the major stop points go? Remind my audience.
Absolutely. So I'm from Dublin originally, and at the moment I'm based in Tenerife in the Canary Islands. So that's like a tropical group of islands off the coast of Africa. So really stunning part of the world. But when I was traveling, so I went from Dublin to London. I lived and I worked in London for about 3.5 years, and I loved it there. I traveled around Southeast Asia. I landed in Perth in the west of Australia. I traveled around Australia. I worked in Sydney for a time. I traveled around New Zealand while I was there as well. And then from there, I flew to Hawaii. I spent some time with family there. I flew to San Francisco. I did the Highway 1 down to LA. This is all by myself, by the way, on those 7-lane or 8-lane freeways coming into LA. I did a bit of travel around the west coast of the States, and I did a bit in Canada as well. I came over to New York. New York is one of my favorite cities of all time. Did a little bit of travel around there, back to Dublin. And then I came back to the States because here's what happened. To fly with Aer Lingus, which is the Irish airline, from New York to Dublin, return was actually $10 cheaper than flying one way. So I thought, well, it would be rude not to. And then I spent around 5 or 6 months traveling around South America. Included in that, I went to Antarctica, I went to the Galapagos Islands. Like, it was just an amazing, amazing trip. And then back home to Ireland via the States. So it was definitely all the way around.
All the way around. Yeah. I said halfway there and back. It's you just kept going all the way around and back again. Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Well, all of this gave you such a great perspective on seeing all the different cultures. And as you mentioned earlier, the resilience and the self capabilities that you had. And where you've landed now, I really would love to dig into this this framework you have, the name of your podcast, everything. Happier at Work. It sounds delightful. It also sounds a little bit elusive based on the people I talk to.
Yeah.
I was giving a talk the other day, and I said to the audience, I said, "What percentage of your family and friends absolutely love their work?" And I had a poll, and it was just devastating. Like less than half, many less than 25% of the people who I know and love actually love their work. So I just want to have you break this down for us, because you do have a framework around this, Aoife. Happier at Work. What is it? How does that work?
I'll preface this by saying, so I had that experience when I worked in Australia, and I came back to Dublin, and I had not a dissimilar experience. It wasn't exactly the same, but these two experiences combined caused me to question everything that I knew. So I went on and I did some coaching qualifications, and then I started a master's in organisational behaviour. And I asked my lecturers, I said, what is going on here? Here's what happened in my organisation. And my lecturer said, that sounds like an issue to do with fit. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And so I became obsessed with this idea of fit. Any opportunity there was to write an assignment on it. I did my entire dissertation on this concept of fit. And really, I've kind of changed the language slightly, so it's not as academic as it was, but really that's what I consider to be happiness at work. It is elusive, I think, in a lot of cases, as studies from various different global organizations will show, that most people are not actually that happy at work. And probably people think that you can't be. But to me, there is this framework to it that if you follow, then that will drive your happiness at work. So the first aspect of it is values. And you can think about this in a few different ways. So the values piece is, from an organization, do you have your values clearly defined? Are those values the lived experience of the people working there? So that's often a disconnect, where the company will say one thing and they will do something else. And one example from an organization that I used to work in is a value of simple, when it was the most bureaucratic organization I think I've ever worked in. And there's a huge disconnect between those two experiences. So saying on the one hand, we want things to be simple here, and on the other hand, creating all of this bureaucracy. So the values then of the lived experience of the people there, but then also at a personal level as an individual, how well do my values align with the values of the organization? And do people around me behave in a way that I expect people to behave based on my own upbringing, based on things that are really, really important to me? So that's the values piece. The next piece then is need satisfaction at work. And I know that this is something that Kelly talks about. there's not that many people talking about need satisfaction. There's people talking about values, there's people talking about strengths, but the needs piece is something that we need to address. Sorry to put that pun in there. But this idea that, so when I talk about need satisfaction, I'm talking about our psychological needs. I'm talking about our 3 basic psychological needs for autonomy, relatedness, and competence. Autonomy being our sense of choice and control over what we do and how we do it. Relatedness then is how we feel a sense of belonging, how we get along with the other people that we work with, but also how we relate what we do on a day-to-day basis to what we want to achieve in our lives, in our careers, but also what the organization is trying to achieve. And this is where managers can really illustrate the impact that people are having at work. And then the third aspect is competence, and that's feeling capable of doing your job. So it's a nice blend of support and challenge. So do you feel sufficiently challenged, or do you feel a bit bored with what you're doing? Do you feel like you have much more to offer? The interesting thing with these needs is it's not just about making sure that the needs are satisfied. It's about finding that balance. So if you think back to autonomy, and having too much autonomy means that you're just kind of floundering. You're not really sure which direction you need to take. But having too little autonomy means that you feel like you're being controlled by someone else, that they're micromanaging you in some way. And so it's about getting that balance right. The third pillar then within the framework is this idea of our strengths at work and understanding what those strengths are. If you ask people, do they actually know what their strengths are? Do you talk about strengths openly? Do you work alongside people who have complementary strengths to you? What are all of the, how do you uncover what your strengths are? What do people come to you and ask you about? What do you do that you feel comes easily and naturally? And other people are like, wow, how did she do that? So it's thinking about all of these things. So they're the 3 pillars. They're what holds up the happiness at work framework. But all of this needs to be underpinned by psychological safety. We need to feel able to share what's going on for us. We need to feel able to speak up, to challenge the status quo. And then it's all overpinned by leadership. So again, we need to have the correct leaders in place who want to lead and who know how to implement these 3 pillars, who know how to talk about it, who know how to get the best from their team. So that gives you kind of an overview of what the Happier at Work framework is.
Nice. I got a very clear picture almost of the house with the foundation and the 3 pillars and sort of the capstone of leadership. And I agree 100% with the leaders really create this environment within which people can experience those other things. Are their needs being met? Are they even clear what their own values are? Sometimes I've done values exercises with my direct reports because I want to help them really surface some things that might be below the surface. And they've really appreciated that. They're like, well, I don't see how this directly relates to work, but I really enjoyed it. And then when you start connecting it to the job, they're like, oh, now I see, right? So it's very, very powerful. And I love this concept that you have around fit. And to me, a lot of times I think about its corollary, which is around flow. There's a natural energy that flows from our mission or between one another, socially, the work that we do together. And where there's not fit, where there's gaps between us, then all of a sudden that energy kind of it dissipates. And it's only a fraction of what it is. So I think that thinking about your world travels and mine, I remember in Italy, for example, when I was in Milan, I really enjoyed the pace and the people and all this. When I went to Rome, it was so much faster and busier and buzzier, and it wasn't a good fit for me personally. Then again, I don't like big cities like New York either, if I'm being honest. So it's just an example about fit is everything. And it's not, we don't have to judge, big city living versus country living or anything else in between. It's just a matter of these examples of fit, that
it's the right place for the right person, the right role, the right manager. There's so many different aspects to it as well.
And it can change, right? So you mentioned, for example, like if I'm feeling belonging, but then all of a sudden the team grows because we're in a fast growing company and now there's 10 times as many of us, maybe I don't feel the same belonging, even though it's the same company. So I think that as managers and leaders, we have to recognize that, we're in a dynamic environment for sure. But one of the ways I know that you help these leaders, for example, is through workshops. And you weren't always a workshop facilitator. I was curious, like, how did you decide that workshops were something that you wanted to do or could potentially help people with this Happier at Work framework?
I think so. I mean, my whole why behind why I started the business was because of the experience that I had. And I wanted to make sure that other people didn't experience these same types of things that I did. So, toxic workplaces, poor managers, like really feeling a lack of confidence in your abilities, not able to not that you're not able to perform, but you feel like you're not giving your all, or you feel like you're not reaching your full potential in some way. And so when I first started my business, I had mentioned that I did some coaching qualifications. So when I first started my business, I started by coaching individuals. And I think I realized pretty quickly that by coaching individuals on a kind of a one-to-one, one-by-one basis, I wasn't going to have the type of impact that I wanted to have. And with all of the corporate experience that I had, delivering presentations, delivering workshops to clients throughout my entire career, it seemed like the obvious choice to kind of go down that road, to have a greater impact, to be able to work with global clients. I do a lot of my workshops online as well. And I suppose, and you know, we've talked about this before, Matt, like my bigger vision for what it is I want to do. I would love to turn that framework into something that is much more scalable than relying solely on me delivering presentations. I would love to create something that people can use in real time, like a central hub. This is the problem I'm having right now. I'm about to go into a meeting, or I have a meeting tomorrow with my manager. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. How can I access that information when I need it, rather than relying on, oh, I need to go and search now for something, or what was that training I did last year or 2 months ago. So I'd love to make something that's accessible, but also scalable, that I can take this message to many, many more companies, like I say, without relying on me being that central force of having to deliver it in person or face-to-face or online.
They're both valuable, of course, but I love that for you, and I really love it for them, because it's just dripping off, the compassion and the wanting to make sure that they get the answers they need in that moment of need. And so you think about today, I hear from leaders all the time, aspiring managers, et cetera, saying, "What do? I go to YouTube, I go to TikTok, I look it up." And I thought, oh my gosh, you're just getting, there's a lot of good content, don't get me wrong, but you're working so hard to try to get it, versus coming in, I need Aoife tube. That's what I need, because you've got this framework. Maybe I sat through your workshop and now I've gone back and now I'm like, okay, but now I'm in the moment of need. Now I need to go have the tough conversation or the alignment conversation, whatever it might be. Like I want your tips when I need them, and not have to wait for a workshop, a month from now, right?
This is it. Yeah.
It's so cool. And I think people really enjoy consuming information in different ways. Like, you have a very successful podcast. You've got workshops. Now having another option, an alternative for people, it makes tremendous sense to me. But I wonder if we can let's just stick in the workshop theme for a second. You've got participants who come in. You're teaching them all about fit. You've got an entire framework about everything, including values and all these different elements, and your foundation of psychological safety. I'm asking you the question about the opposite of fit, which is almost like misalignment. How do they describe it in their own words? What does it feel like for them when they're feeling like something's missing, or when there's misalignment? How do they describe it? And then how does the workshop help them sort of
it's really so, well, there's a few different ways that people describe it. So a lot of the time, people feel like they're not reaching their full potential. So they feel like they have so much more to offer, but they don't necessarily have that opportunity there. It could be some sort of unique frustration with their manager. They're not getting along. They're kind of butting heads a little bit with their immediate manager. It could show up as an issue with the entire leadership. So they're kind of misaligned with how the company is being run. They're not really seeing, like, I'm not sure if I agree with these decisions that have been made, or they're just not aware of how the decision has been made. So these are the kinds of things, these are the kinds of ways that it presents itself, I think. And sometimes people just think, well, that's just how work is. That's how it's supposed to be. And maybe they don't even realize that they have that issue until they uncover all of these things, until they start talking about what's going on for them.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think a lot of times we get bad advice from people who either have it and take it for granted, or maybe are from a bygone generation that didn't have it.
Work is supposed to suck.
Right. Yeah. You're lucky to have a job. You shouldn't be expecting, to really enjoy it. work
Yeah.
is just work. And you're like, wait a second, I hope that's not true because I spend a lot of
Yeah.
time at work.
Exactly. This is it. Yeah. Yeah.
It's so true. So and I think that if we go back a little bit earlier when you said, if I feel like I'm not really having the impact I could, or something,
Mm.
I'm not bringing my full self, a lot of that's that evidence that the natural energy that's within me is running up against those gaps. I don't
Yeah.
feel that fit, that flow's not happening. It's just
Mm.
a warning sign that there's something that's out of alignment.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that
Absolutely.
in your workshop, you must have exercises and things that help people to talk about how to reframe or to find alignment. I think a lot of people are also worried that if I'm not happy at my current situation, that means I have to leave my job and the job market's terrible. And you're like, whoa, time
Mm.
out. Who said anything about leaving your job? That's not the place
Yeah.
to start. There must be like earlier steps or things to try before we get to that
Yeah.
point.
And I think this is the assumption that a lot of people have, and especially companies as well. They're like, well, we don't want everyone to suddenly leave the organization. I'm like,
Right.
we shouldn't worry if you're doing all of the things, if you're I
Yeah.
hate saying box ticking, but I'm trying to
Yeah.
think of a different way
Yeah.
of saying, like, if you're kind of meeting all of the requirements throughout the happier at work model, then everything should be okay within your organization.
Mm.
And the only people that leave are the people who are not aligned with the organization. And that's okay, because actually they could be draining other people. They could be bringing morale down. They're not a good fit to be working in your organization anyway. But you're absolutely right, Matt. Like, the assumption is, oh, well, if I'm not happy, then I need to leave. You don't have to leave your job. There's so many different things that you could do. And I suppose for trying to figure out where the misalignment is happening, it's really doing personal exercises for yourself. So I'm sure, most organizations these days are very clear about the values that they have. I'm not sure that they're very clear in terms of stating what behaviors are expected
Mhm.
and what behaviors are not expected around each of those values. And then even beyond that, I think there's a lot of companies not great at, or they might be great at saying this is what the values are, but then holding people to account. So if someone is behaving in such a way that doesn't align with how the organization has set out that they want people to behave, and they get away with it, then other people think, oh, well, hey, Matt he's being rude to people. So I think it's okay to be rude to people here. So no one is holding him accountable for being rude. No one's pulling him up. There's no consequences for that. And so this is when those kind of misaligned values can spread throughout an organization as well, when people are not held to account. The opposite of that is when people are celebrated, rewarded, and recognized for living the values and behaviors in the organization. So they are rewarded by being recognized in the way that they like to be recognized, because not everyone likes public recognition. They are recognized through promotions, through working on special projects, access to senior leaders, things like that. And when other people see, well, this is what it takes to be recognized in this way. Okay, so I need to follow the behaviors of that individual. Let's look under the hood. What are they really doing? What are they doing differently? And I think, it should be transparent why these decisions are made as well. Going back to my earlier point about the importance of transparency. But I think really understanding these things, taking a level up overall, trying to understand, okay, where is the misalignment actually happening? So is it at a values level? Are there needs that are not being met? So if you're having difficulty with your manager, for example, is it because you feel like you're being micromanaged, or you have the opposite problem where your manager has just kind of left you to your own devices? They haven't really explained the expectations of the role very well, the outcomes that are expected. I've had both of those situations. I've been at the receiving end of an absolute micromanager. This is how I need you to spend your time. This is how I need you to carry out this task. But I've also worked with someone who was very laissez-faire, didn't really explain what was required, didn't really know the role of a manager. So, like, understanding those types of things, are your needs being met? And then at the third aspect might be, do you get the opportunity to use your strengths, and do you know what your strengths are? This is something I'm thinking about for myself in my business, my background, and we haven't really touched on my background. But I had a 20-year career working in market research in the, as you call it in the States, the consumer packaged goods. So I was always on the agency side. I'm really good at analytics, analyzing data, pulling together a story, making connections between the dots. So I sat down with a friend a couple of weeks ago and we talked about how can I bring more of that, my past career and things that I was really, really good at, into what I'm doing now. And we came up with this idea that if I had access to surveys, which I do because I carry out my own surveys, but also access to public surveys like the ones that are done by global organizations, and kind of pick them apart a little bit. Like, what are they saying, but what are they not saying? And how are they trending over time? And translating that into what could that potentially mean for a specific organization?
Mm.
You know, if we take those learnings, how can we apply them very specifically to your situation? So bringing in things like that. So across those three, I suppose it's really understanding where is the misalignment happening. And I was about to say, hopefully it's not happening across all three at the same time, because for me, it's probably going to spell disaster.
Temporarily, at least, for sure. Yeah. And I think that, barring major events, then hopefully, as you mentioned, some of the pistons are firing properly, and then
exactly
with a little bit of creativity, a little bit of want to as well, and a little bit of the demystification that a useful framework like yours, which actually has the benefit of being simple, unlike that client of yours with all the bureaucracy that only said simple. Yours actually is simple, which is nice. I think that you have a lot better chance of closing those gaps, finding that fit, allowing things to flow freely, and making sure that we hit all the things that are necessary in your in your framework about being happier at work. So thanks so much for sharing that with us. I love it. But I'm going to do this, Aoife. I wouldn't be true to my own values if I didn't have a little bit of fun every now and then. So I've got a trivia question.
One of my core values as well, Matt.
Good.
So I'll meet you right there.
We have tremendous alignment in that regard. And you mentioned that you're in Tenerife, which is in the Canary Islands, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to have AI ask us a trivia question. You and I are a team, and this is going to be a question about canaries, because that's completely random. Why not?
So now I wish I hadn't said that.
I know, that's kind of how I feel most days, but we're going to try it anyway. So here's the question for us. What color is the most common type of canary? You think it's got to be, right? Come on.
So it's got to be yellow, no?
Yellow? We're going to go with yellow.
I would say yellow.
If you're playing along at home, you can go ahead and lock in your answer. We're going to say to Google Gemini here, that's correct. Ding, ding, ding. Aoife, you got it. The most common type of canary is the yellow canary, known for its bright yellow plumage and cheerful song. How about that?
Great.
Very nice. Well, canaries and learning about them are great. I'd rather learn about you. Aoife, where can my audience go to learn more about you and all the wonderful things that you're doing with your Happier at Work framework?
As you mentioned, Matt, I have my own podcast called Happier at Work. So since you're listening to this or watching on YouTube, come and find me. So search for Happier at Work and you should find me. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so I would love to connect with people there. And if I may, I will spell my name for people because it's not that common outside of Ireland. My name is spelled Aoife, and it's pronounced Aoife, as you very rightly said. Thank you. And my surname is O'Brien. So if that's fairly common, hopefully you can spell it. It's spelled with an E, not an A. But search me on LinkedIn and I would love to connect with you there. They are the two best places to find me. I also, so based on my Happier at Work framework, I do have an assessment. I will share the link and we can put the link in the show notes for anyone who wants to take that assessment and understand a little bit more about where they are from a company perspective on their happiness at work journey.
Love it. And just as Aoife said, listeners, I will have those links for you in the show notes. I know I can't wait to take the assessment as well. I've already checked out the podcast. So Aoife, thanks so much for sharing your experiences, your world travels, the lessons, your research, your work, your study, all of it. I've just so thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, Matt. I think you're a fantastic host. Thank you so much for those thoughtful questions.